What do you remember?
Not now, Carl.
There must be something.
I remember fighting the Romans at Masada.
That was in 73 AD.
You asked.
Back in 2004, Universal Pictures released a bold, action-heavy take on Van Helsing, starring Hugh Jackman in the title role. And while the movie didn't exactly win critics over, it still managed to become a box office hit. Despite all the negative reviews, the film gained a loyal following, largely because it leaned into monster hunting mayhem, featured some cool visuals, and gave us an unforgettable version of the famous vampire slayer. Ever since then, the idea of rebooting Van Helsing has been floating around Hollywood, but it's only recently that a serious attempt seems to be back in motion. Van Helsing, as a character, has been part of pop culture for well over a century. Originally created by Bram Stoker in his Dracula novel, he's known as a doctor and vampire hunter who's always one step ahead of the supernatural. Beyond the Jackman version, Van Helsing has shown up in everything from Dracula 2000 to Penny Dreadful, and even the animated Hotel Transylvania movies. The character clearly has staying power, so it's not surprising that Universal still sees potential in him. Now, the path to a Van Helsing reboot hasn't exactly been smooth. Universal originally tried relaunching their monster universe back in 2012, planning to bring back several of their classic characters at once. At one point, Tom Cruise was actually set to take on the Van Helsing role in a fresh reboot that would tie into The Mummy, another classic monster property. But things didn't go according to plan. When Cruise starred in The Mummy reboot in 2017, it was supposed to launch the Dark Universe, a shared cinematic world filled with werewolves, vampires, and other ghouls. Instead, the movie flopped, and with it, the entire shared universe concept crumbled. But instead of giving up on these characters completely, Universal shifted gears. They stopped chasing the Marvel-style shared universe and started focusing on standalone stories, and that new approach actually worked. The Invisible Man reboot in 2020 was a massive hit, proving there was still a big appetite for these kinds of films if they were done right. So now, with renewed confidence and a more focused direction, Universal is giving Van Helsing another shot, not as part of a shared universe, but as his own dark, thrilling story. So where are things at now with the new Van Helsing reboot? Well, the latest update came in 2023 from director Julius Avery, who confirmed that the movie is still happening. Even though there hadn't been much news for a while, Avery made it clear that development is ongoing. He's not just directing, he's also working on the script himself, with horror icon James Wan signed on as producer. That pairing alone is enough to get horror fans excited. Avery said, "I'm currently writing and intend to direct myself with James producing." He admitted that progress has been slower than expected, but he made it clear the project isn't dead, just taking time to get right. Now, it's true that updates have been few and far between since the film was first confirmed in late 2020. For a while, things were looking quiet, almost too quiet, which led some fans to wonder if it had been quietly shelved. But Avery's confirmation brought the reboot back into the spotlight and reminded everyone that it's still in motion, even if slowly. It's not entirely surprising that progress has stalled a bit. Universal has been reshuffling its monster movie plans for years, trying to find a consistent direction. And while they've found success with standalone films, there's still no overarching game plan, which means projects like Van Helsing sometimes get caught in that shuffle. One of the big questions surrounding the reboot, of course, is casting. So far, Universal hasn't announced who'll be playing the iconic monster hunter this time around. And while fans still love Hugh Jackman's take on the character, it's highly unlikely he'll be returning. This reboot seems to be aiming for a clean slate, not a continuation or sequel to the 2004 version. Bringing Jackman back would just muddy the waters, especially if the story has nothing to do with the previous film. So, it's probably safe to assume a fresh face will step into the role, and they'll likely be surrounded by an entirely new cast of characters as well. That said, we can still expect some familiar names from the Dracula universe to show up. After all, Van Helsing's whole deal is tracking and slaying vampires, and you really can't do that without bringing Dracula into the mix in some form. It's almost certain that Dracula will appear in the film, either as the main villain or at least as a looming threat. The two characters are forever linked in horror history, so it'd be strange to leave him out entirely. And since Avery has a background in supernatural horror, fans are hoping this version will lean into the darker, creepier side of the mythology. But what's really interesting is how open the story still feels, not just because the movie is in early development, but because the original Jackman film actually left room for more. Even though it was packed with action and closed out with a big showdown, there were definitely places the story could still go. We never got to fully explore the deeper lore behind the monster world or Van Helsing's past, and there's still potential to introduce new characters that weren't part of the 2004 version. That's the beauty of reboots. They offer a chance to reimagine, expand, and even fix what didn't work the first time. So even if this new Van Helsing has no ties to Jackman's film, the possibilities are wide open. We could see an entirely new take on Van Helsing's origins, or maybe a more grounded, gritty version of the character. There could be new monster hunting allies, or maybe even a deeper exploration of the vampires themselves, who they are, how they came to be, and what their world looks like. And let's not forget, James Wan is producing this, so the horror elements are likely to be front and center, with a bunch of tension, atmosphere, and terrifying moments. What makes this all the more exciting is that Universal seems to have learned from their past missteps. Instead of trying to build an entire universe around these characters from day one, they're now letting each story stand on its own. That's what made The Invisible Man such a hit. It was its own movie, not weighed down by endless world building. If Van Helsing follows that same model, it has a real shot at being something special. And even though things have been quiet lately, we can't ignore the potential this reboot has. Avery clearly cares about getting it right, and James Wan's involvement brings a level of trust to the project. So while it might be taking a little longer than expected, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes the best stories just need time to come together, especially when you're dealing with legendary characters and fan expectations. In fact, the delay might be a blessing in disguise. It gives the team more time to refine the script, lock in the perfect cast, and figure out exactly what kind of story they want to tell. And with horror being in such a strong place right now, both in theaters and on streaming, the timing could end up being perfect. There's definitely room for a dark, stylish vampire hunting film with fresh energy and a new take on an old legend. So, is the Van Helsing reboot still happening? Absolutely. Is it moving slowly? Sure, but there's still momentum, and fans shouldn't lose hope. There's clearly passion behind the scenes, and with the right script and cast, this could be the reboot that finally does justice to the legendary vampire hunter. Whether it leans into gothic horror or a more modern twist, one thing's for sure, Van Helsing still has some monsters left to fight. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.